This is the second part of our lecture, Four-fold Alienation, in which we're examining Marx's text, A Strange Labor. A Strange Labor starts with this quote that I have on the PowerPoint. There are a couple of reasons why I wanted to start here. The first line of each one of these essays definitely sets the tone for what is going to be discussed and why it's going to be discussed, right? So some of the words that should jump at you are this idea that the worker sinks to the level of a commodity, and in that he becomes the wretched of the earth. That this wretchedness is in inverse proportion to the power and magnitude of his production, and that in this way the whole society is divided into two classes: the property owners and the propertyless workers. So a couple of reasons why I chose this quote. First, it sets the tone for what Marx is going to discuss, right? We're talking about political economy itself, but we're also talking about this relational form of identity, which he owes this development to Hegel, but he doesn't fall for the Hegelian formula where this dichotomy is inevitable. He wants to say that there are other things that we can do, right? So, another reason why I chose this quote is because in calling the proletariat the wretched of the earth, Marx created this sort of stratification, right? He started the analysis of class in philosophy, and it's later on going to be taken into sociology, psychology, and obviously literature. Another reason is that there's this very influential book that is called The Wretched of the Earth by Martinique writer Frantz Fanon. And one of the things that Marxist theory does, maybe unbeknownst to Marx, is that it allows people from disenfranchised or not so well known backgrounds to start writing about their life condition. So Frantz Fanon is going to become one of the first writers on post-colonial thought. And post-colonial thought owes its inception to Marxist idea. So does liberation theology, of which we read just a little bit back when we were reading Farmer, and we'll go back to that idea of people who have rights but are not totally taken into consideration by society. So remember, that was one of the criticisms of the social contract and the way in which the social contract talks about, well, if we all use reason, we're all equal. Marx, postcolonial theorists, feminists, are going to say, wait, no, because there's something here about the way in which white rationality or Western rationality work, that it excludes everybody else from the discourse, right? So if you're interested in post-colonial theory, there are a lot of writers you can read. There's Frantz Fanon, there's Edward Said with Orientalism, there's Linda Martin Alcoff, who does post-colonial theory from a Latin American perspective. There is Edouard Glissant, who is also coming from a more Iberian Caribbean perspective. So this is a discipline. Or Gayatri Spivak, who is Indian, and she's one of the most recognized voices in post-colonial thought. So if you're interested in that, again, shoot me an email. I can point you in the direction of some of the people who work around these ideas and some of the work that I'll be doing here on campus next semester. So anyway, when Marx starts this manuscript talking about political economy itself, he wants to talk about the way in which things already are set in motion. He is not interested in what might have happened or how things might have been formulated, but on the reality, right? That historical materialism I was mentioning before, the reality of conditions that we have right now. The accumulation of capital in a few hands, Marx sees it as dangerous because that's going to push for the Hegelian idea of the master and the slave, where the master owns the means of production and they can receive them through the work of the proletariat, right? But the proletariat, other than transforming nature, they don't have anything else, right? So it's not like the proletariat have access to a bountiful nature. This is actually one of the criticisms Marx is going to make, is that the proletariat only transforms that nature so that they can earn a wage paid for the factory owner so that the proletariat can spend that money gaining, earning, buying other products that are made by other owners of the means of production. So Marx sees the proletariat here as the bottom rank in society, and in capitalism, sort of a fatal fate, right? The propertyless worker can't get out of this dichotomy on his or her own. So that's why he talks about the bourgeois as the owners of the means of production and the proletariat as the workers. It is up for debate, but a lot of philosophers and political theorists agree that we don't have proletariat anymore in the way Marx envisioned them, that the category has actually expanded. It's not only about manual laborers anymore, but it incorporates people like me, right? Who we works not with her body, but still like I am part of a market economy. And if you ever want to talk about the marketing philosophy, I'll buy you a drink and we can talk about that because it's pretty fascinating how Marx would be right as to who gets hired and who doesn't get hired and how you get hired. But I'm pretty sure that in any other thing that you guys are doing, Marx's ideas will in some form apply. This is why our second reflection for this module is on Marx. So remember that back then when Marx is writing the end of the 1800s, we don't have unions, people work more than, in some cases they used to work like up to 20 hours a day, right? How do you survive that? And there's no protection for the proletariat. If you don't show up, if you're a woman and your patron wants to sleep with you and you said no, you're out of a job. You're thrown out to the streets, right? So in an economic system, how does a properless worker survive? We sell what we have. And you might have, I have a student who works for FedEx or UPS and he carries boxes, right? So that's a very close to the definition Marx talks about the proletariat. We use our body, we use our skills now. We become a commodity. We know we enter a market. We know that we are supposed to sell ourselves and that there are these things that are going to make us more marketable or less marketable, right? I was just reading from Forbes this article on the less profitable majors you can have when you graduate from college. And it's really weird because philosophy is at like one of the bottom, I think it's the bottom four, right? But then there are other studies that say that if you studied philosophy later on in life, you're going to get all these different benefits. Not only are you going to make more money, but your life is going to be more stable. But what is funny is that we analyze professions not with regard to how happy we are with what we do, but how much money we get and how safe that work is. So these are some of the ideas that are present in Marx's theory when he talks about the propertyless worker. How can we survive in a capitalist world where we can't just trade what we do for something else? we sell our skills. We sell part of who we are. And for Marx, that's going to be really problematic, right? Because our labor becomes, in a way, our private property, except that the market has turned against us. So think about Rousseau, Hobbes, and Locke when Marx says political economy starts with the fact of private property, but it does not explain it to us. Locke mentioned that it was through work that we create private property, right? But that's like very dubious because, as I was saying in the lecture on the aftermath of the social contract, that's the way that the colonizers, the pilgrims, used to appropriate the land that had been labored on by the Native Americans. So no, Western philosophy has started from this idea that private property exists and that owning things is a good thing. Nobody has analyzed why it is that we need private property. It's a given. And Marx does try to explain that a little bit, not in this essay, but in some other work that he has. And he is kind of sickened by political economy, right? Because what it does is that it explains what it already exists, or it talks about what it already exists, without really having to explain, without forcing itself to explain the relationship that wages have to profit, or the interest, what's the interest of the capitalist in doing these things, right? So I think it's interesting to note that Marx is criticizing the basis on which capitalism works and the basis on which Western society has advanced. That our ideas on social contract haven't really explained how social contract came to be and why we decided to give up our rights and why we decided that owning things was good, and that owning things, remember that they all say this, having private property, having industry, moving forward is the reason why we gave up some of our rights. So for Marx, what doesn't make sense anymore is that we gave out our rights to such a degree that we are starving. We have nothing else but our bare bodies to face up to that economy, right? So I love this quote and how Marx criticizes political theories through theology. So I'm going to read it just because I like it that much. Theology, in the same way, explains the origin of evil by the fall of man. That is, it assumes as a fact in historical form what has to be explained. So if you read any of the theologians, especially the time when Marx is writing and before, they would tell us that God gave us free will so that we could choose, and we sometimes choose to make good deeds and sometimes we choose to make bad deeds, but that's what free will means. That's a circular argument. The idea that theology explains the origin of evil by the fall of man is already a circular argument because it doesn't explain the origin of evil. It just talks about how men already innately had this evil trait within them that made us fall, that made us sin, right? So it answers the question with a presupposition. It assumes a fact of something that should be explained, that would be stronger if it were explained, right? So Marx talks about how, because we haven't explained any of that, we don't understand how our system works and the way in which the worker becomes poorer the more wealth he produces. He talks about how the worker becomes a commodity, and the more we create, the more we cheapen ourselves. So I'm running out of my 15 minutes here. I'll come back for part 3 and we'll talk about What this means that the worker becomes an ever cheaper commodity the more commodities he creates, right? I think we'll see that we have all experienced this.